Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. When I was a kid, one of my first favorite artists was Billy Joel. I had all his greatest hits albums, and I listened to them so much that I could probably still sing all of Down East or Alexa from memory. I even saw him live with my mom when I was 12 when he played the Boston Garden with Elton John. Looking back on his work now, I think the thing that drew me to it most was his brand of goofy sincerity. They were real songs about real emotions, but they were also kinda over the top about it, and you get the sense that he knew. It made it easy to connect with the stories, even if I was too young to really get the specifics, and to understand how he did that, I thought I'd look at one of the goofiest and most sincere songs he's ever written, Uptown Girl. Let's take it apart. The song starts with a quick drum fill, then this, which introduces us to the main chord progression we'll be hearing for most of the song, built around a bass line that walks up the scale from the root to the fifth over and over. There's a slight twist though. Instead of playing G sharp minor here, he goes back to E major in what's called an inversion, which just means the bass isn't playing the root of the chord. This lets him avoid the sad sound of two minor chords in a row while still getting to play something that passes for a G sharp chord to keep the walk-up intact. Why is that so important? Because the walk-up is the whole story of the song. Uptown Girl is about a working-class protagonist in love with a woman of much higher social standing, and the constant rising line can be read as a metaphor for the upward mobility Joel's character desires. And it seems like he has a pretty good shot, at least according to the melody. While the bass is walking up, the vocals are walking down to meet it. The line starts on a high E, Uptown Girl, way out of reach, moves down to B, she's been living in her uptown world, the highest point the bass reaches, and then as we're about to return to 1 and start over, the melody walks all the way down to the low E to keep it company. I bet she never had a back. So from a melodic perspective, it sure sounds like she's interested. Or maybe he just thinks she is, because as soon as it gets to the low E, it jumps right back up to a high one. Backstreet guy! But at this point, I'm straining even my ability to read narratives into musical gestures, so I'll let you decide for yourself if Joel is a reliable narrator. The melody is also interesting rhythmically, in that it's not all that interesting rhythmically. It alternates between quarter notes and runs of straight eighths. The most advanced thing we get is quarter note syncopation, where some of the lines start on beat 2 instead of beat 1. Or okay, sometimes there's an eighth note pickup, but it's still pretty straightforward, and looking ahead to the other sections, we see that the fact that we have eighth notes at all is pretty spicy. The rest of the song mostly relies on quarters and halves. And this isn't because Joel doesn't know how to do rhythms, it's to help bolster the song's everyman image. The protagonist isn't some nerd who went to music school, he's a man of the people, so when it comes to melodic structure, accessibility is key. It's a strong melody that's easy to remember and easy to sing along to, which makes it easy to relate to the person singing it. But of course, there's more to this verse than just the chords and melody. The song is a tribute to Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, which means it's full of harmony vocals. This is convenient because I literally just did a video about harmony vocals, link in the description, and while I honestly didn't plan this, Uptown Girl uses almost every technique I described. In the verse, we see 4 approaches. We start with a wordless foreground line, right at the beginning of the song, which is mostly there to let us know we should be paying attention to the background singers. Then Joel comes in and we get some unaccompanied melody, she's been living in her uptown world, setting him as the star, after which he's joined by a background line, I bet her mama never told her why, which they keep adding more and more singers to build up energy before we get the full vocal treatment with a series of echo lines. Uptown girl, she's been living in her white bread world, as long as anyone with. These fill the gaps between the lines of the main melody, slightly overlapping so we never lose momentum. And finally, let's talk about the clapping, which again helps make this feel more relatable. Along with voice, body percussion is one of the few instruments that almost everyone has access to regardless of social or economic status, so it makes the song seem more grounded and human. The rhythm also helps set the tone. Even though there's a drummer, the claps have a pretty similar timbre to a snare drum, and they're so much more prominent that they sort of take over that role, and since they're hitting on every beat like a metronome, we get this driving, insistent pulse celebrating the communal spirit of our narrator's world. That all changes when we move into the B section. Here, the chords have shifted to one of the most classic progressions in Western popular music. It's a variation on the doo-wop changes, and it's a perfect example of what's called functional harmony, which is the idea that different chords in a key have different functions or jobs to do. We start with the 1 chord, which is at rest, then go to 6 minor, a really similar chord that serves to extend that restful sound. From there we go to 2 minor, which adds instability, and then to 5, which points us back to 1. This is some pretty classic harmonic language, but you may have noticed a problem. since when was C the 1 chord? That's right, we've changed keys, and it's a pretty drastic shift too. E major and C major only have 3 of their 7 notes in common, so shifting between them without preparation should be jarring, and if you listen to the song, it kinda is. This is where the story moves from pining for the Uptown girl to imagining a world where she's willing to step outside the confines of her social status in order to return that affection, and a sudden key change helps call your attention to that new framework. But it's not completely out of left field either. While C major is pretty far from E major, it's only 1 note away from E minor. In fact, the chord C major is the flat 6 in that key, and since the verse ends on B, we get this little deceptive resolution from 5 to 6, making this transition feel less like a jump to a distant key and more like a move to the parallel minor. That interpretation even works for the next chord, A minor, as well. Don't get me wrong, we've definitely changed keys, but the fact that, at least to start, it's also possible we've just gone minor gives this section a sense of wistfulness and longing. The minor analysis breaks on the 3rd chord, but I'm gonna spin a bit of a conspiracy theory here, because D minor is a really interesting chord in our original key of E major if you're familiar with an obscure phenomenon in an advanced field called Neoromanian Theory. Specifically, it's interesting if you've seen my video on the exo chord. I'll link to the full video in the description, but briefly, Neoromanian Theory is all about measuring the distances between chords. There's a couple different ways to do that, but in one of the most common ones, called the tonnettes, the furthest distance is between a major triad and a minor triad a whole step below it. Since up to this point, we've still sort of been able to hold on to our original key, hitting the exo chord is a striking sound, ripping us away from that tonality. It's the furthest thing from our previously established harmonic home. Why does that matter? Well, the lyrics here are when she knows what she wants, and if Joel is to be believed, what she wants is the furthest thing from where she is. The chord fills us in on how she's feeling. Did Joel do this on purpose? No, obviously not. Neoromanian Theory didn't even exist in 1983 when the song came out, at least not outside David Lewin's head, and I doubt Billy Joel was keeping up with developments in high-level music theory anyway. He just wanted to play the 2 chord. But Joel's intentions aren't the point. This musical moment feels like a really resonant one to me, and that faint outline of an exochord relationship seems like a pretty good reason why. From there we get this, which starts out the same, but then underneath the D chord the bass plays a B, turning it into B half diminished. We'd expect that to resolve back to C, but instead it goes to E7, so what's up with that? Well, I mean, we could try to find a good explanation for these in C, but it's actually a lot simpler. Remember how the first time through we ended with the 2 chord and the 5 chord, setting up a return to the 1? Yeah, we're just doing that again, but in a new key. That's right, it's another key change, this time to A major. This one's sneakier because it uses the B half diminished, which is a chord in both keys, as a sort of pivot to get from one to the other without being obvious about it. Or okay, the specific B chord is borrowed from A minor, but the strength of the 2-5 sound helps smooth that out. Before we move on though, there's a couple more things in the B section I want to address. First, the clapping has switched from its metronome pulse to just hitting the backbeat, which gives this section a more laid-back vibe. The verses are describing the present, but here we're daydreaming about the future, and the shift in rhythm helps highlight that change. I also want to touch on the background vocals. They start on more echo lines, and they stick with that for most of the section, but at the very end, they suddenly all come together into tight harmony. It's a beautiful effect, pulling that dream into focus. This catapults us into the interlude, which besides the key change is pretty similar. It starts with 1, then 6 minor, then 2 minor, just like before. Your ears know what to expect here, but instead of the 5, the chord stays where it is, except suddenly it's major. You can hear this a couple different ways, and I think they're all correct. It happens on the line I'm in love, so the shift to a brighter, happier tonality helps show that lift. But also, B major happens to be the 5 chord in our original verse key, E, so this chord helps show us the way back there. Oh, and bonus, unlike our other transitions, A major and E major are actually pretty similar, so this return is way smoother than the departure. Or at least that's part of why the transition feels so good, but there's actually another trick going on here too, and it's happening in the lyrics. In this section, Joel sings, "She'll see I'm not so tough just because I'm in love with an..." and that's it. The thought's not done. If you want the end of the sentence, you have to scan ahead to the verse where he resolves it with Uptown Girl. This technique of stretching your lyrical structure beyond the metric structure of the piece is called enjambment, and by using it, the interlude never really seems to end, it just melts into the verse. The last real section in this song is the bridge, where we've changed keys again, this time switching to the relatively nearby key of G Lydian. This is like G major but with a raised fourth to make it even brighter. Here we're walking up the scale just like in the verse, but we're only going up 3 scale steps instead of 5, giving it a more restrained sound. We still need 4 chords though, so in between A and B minor they use what's called a secondary dominant, which is a highly directional chord that points somewhere other than the root. In this case we're using F sharp, the 5 chord from B, to set up the B chord even though we're not really in that key. In order to keep the walk-up though, they use another inversion with the bass playing A sharp, the leading tone, which just slides up to B before walking down to A and then G to start again. The second time through, we borrow a trick from the interlude and end on B major instead in order to return to the verse. And that's pretty much it in terms of sections, but I'm not quite done talking about background vocals, so let's do a lightning round of all the different techniques they employ for the rest of the song. In the bridge, they all start in unison before splitting off into some independent lines to add some additional richness. The next verse does similar stuff to the previous ones, but with an extra high voice to raise the stakes.
She'll understand what kind of guy I've been, and then I'll win.
In the B section, they pull out some emphatic harmony, which we haven't really seen yet. This means they're only singing on a couple of the words to highlight them.
And when she's walking, she's looking so fine.
Which helps this feel different and more cohesive than the previous B section, which relied mostly on busier echo lines. In the final verse, they bring back that background line from the very beginning, except this time they're singing it while Joel is singing the lead.
Uptown girl, she's been living in her white-traded world. As long as anyone will.
If you weren't already familiar with both lines, this might have sounded overwhelming, but since you know them from earlier in the song, it serves to ramp up the excitement of the section like it's building to something huge. Instead though, it drops the floor out from under you, switching into the bridge again, but this time only Joel is singing. Going from such a rich, complex vocal arrangement to just a solo lead is jarring, and it snaps your attention back to where it's supposed to be, on Joel. Once he's reestablished himself, the other singers come back, and then we fade out on a vamp of the verse, but before we go, they've got one last trick up their sleeve, a fully independent line. It's quiet, but listen for the dude singing Going Uptown.
Uptown girl, she's my uptown girl. You know I'm in love with her.
And that's basically it. This was a fun song to look at because on the surface it seems like pretty straightforward pop, and like, yeah, it is, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not complex too. It takes a lot of skill to make something that sounds easy but still sounds good, and while I don't listen to Billy Joel as much as I used to, revisiting this song helped remind me why I liked him so much in the first place. And hey, thanks for watching. As always, this song was chosen by my patrons on Patreon. The poll to pick the next one goes up over there next week. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.